Welcome to another episode of No Power Panel. I'm Noam, and I'm very excited for today's episode. Today, I will be speaking with Dr. Laura Morlock, PhD. She is a professor. She has a background in religious diversity, dress, and human rights, and is passionate about gender equity and diversity. And she has a particular interest in the Middle East and in the situation in Gaza, focusing on it from a human rights perspective and from the perspective of a human who has knowledge about the area and is going to be able to explain to the listeners and viewers out there like you a little bit about the background, a little bit about the history of the area of Israel, Palestine, Zionism, both Christian Zionism, Jewish Zionism, secular Zionism, what those differences are, and how it all works to have created the disaster that we now see as the state of Israel. So that's going to be a really fascinating conversation coming up. Stay tuned for that. The chapters, if you just want to skip ahead to that, will be broken down in the video description, so you'll be able to skip to that chapter if you want. But if you'd like to stay, we're just going to touch on a couple of the big news affecting leftists in particular of the last week. The first one that I want to bring up is that the NDP leadership race is now officially underway. There is only one declared candidate so far. We were fortunate enough to interview him on this show a couple of weeks ago. That is Yves Engler. And he actually was on Isaac's last show with us as a co-host. So we were fortunate to have that conversation. We'd love to welcome any of the other potential leadership candidates as this race goes forward. The current field shaping up appears to be Mr. Engler, Monsieur Engler, along with Heather McPherson, who is the Member of Parliament for Edmonton Strathcona, and appears to be running as kind of the establishment of the NDP party candidate. She's very much the caucus member who is most being talked about as the next potential leader, and she is running it from the kind of center left of the party, I think it's fair to say, while Yves Engler is running with the backing of the Socialist Caucus. And those with experience with the NDP will have an understanding of who the Socialist Caucus are and what they do within the party. The other candidate who is very much being talked about as starting to put together a campaign, starting to collect signatures, is grandson of former federal NDP leader David Lewis and son of former Ontario NDP leader Stephen Lewis, and that is Avi Lewis. Avi Lewis might be best known to people as a filmmaker, a journalist, and as the husband of author and activist Naomi Klein. That would be a very interesting race shaping up, where you would have Yves Engler kind of at the very left of the field, Avi Lewis inheriting that traditional NDP socialist, social democrat, left-wing, progressive, but still with ties to the establishment, deeply rooted generationally. And then you would have Heather McPherson, who has been a rising star in Parliament, has a lot of respect within the existing party structure, and within members who like the direction of the party under Jagmeet Singh, of which we have to remember most people who are currently members of the NDP joined the party under Jagmeet Singh's leadership. So people who worked closely for him might have an upper hand. There isn't the kind of disdain that exists amongst general Canadian electorate for Jagmeet Singh at this point within the NDP membership, which tends to be a lot more generous to its former leaders, Tom Mulcair being the obvious exception. So that's where the NDP leadership race currently stands. We expect that Avi Lewis and Heather McPherson will be making their announcements in the not too distant future. Certainly by the end of this month, we can expect to have heard from most of the candidates, we would think. There are other current caucus members who are being still considering running. That does include Leah Gazan, the MP for Winnipeg Centre, and Jenny Kwan, the MP for Vancouver East. Also still considering runs are former caucus members Ruth Ellen Brousseau, who was the MP for Berthier-Masconanger from 2011 to 2019, and Peter Julian, who was the Member of Parliament for New Westminster Burnaby from 2004 until 2025, 21 years. And Peter Julian did run for the leadership in the 2017 election. However, he did drop out before the actual voting had begun, and he then did endorse Jagmeet Singh. So that's the background of the people who might be the likely contenders. One other candidate who is apparently considering running is Bonita Zerillo, who is the former MP for Port Moody Coquitlam from 2021 until 2025. She is apparently considering a comeback for party leadership as well. It does appear that the most likely candidates are Heather McPherson, Avi Lewis, and Eve Engler, as well as a couple of people who are city councilors and unionists who are also considering running. So that is where that race stands. I will continue to keep you updated as we go forward. Into our next story, which is the story that has been getting a lot of the online left attention in the last week, which is the news about Corus Media. Now, Corus Media has been a public group. They are a group that consider themselves an incubator for left-wing online personalities. They reportedly help with communications and with social media and with boosting your messaging and your audience. That's all well and good, and they pay you something as well. The problem comes in with the pay, because what it's turned out is that they are funded by a dark money group that does not have to report where it gets its money. So these people are getting, in some cases, $8,000 a month, in some cases as low as $250 a month, varying in between in a lot of circumstances, though that's the high end and the low end. And they don't know where this money is coming from. They don't have to disclose to their audience where this money is coming from. And that puts them at a lot of risk of just being completely corrupted in their interests. Now, that's not to say that these people's messaging is being controlled necessarily, although they do also have to attend a daily messaging meeting, and they have to clear all of their guests in government and politics and elected office with Corus Media, and they have to agree not to talk about the other personalities. And, 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 and. So, are the messaging being controlled? I think it's fair to say that if you have to abide by all of those things, we can't really trust what you're saying if you tell us that you're not. And that's the point. This is a contract that anyone should be ashamed for having signed. Look, this is my channel has currently less than 100 subscribers, and I get views in the thousands on many videos. And if I was approached by a group that promised to like double, triple, quadruple my views and help me monetize and get to the point that I want this channel to get to, but they gave me a contract like this to sign with these kinds of parameters, and the funding came from a source that was dark money funded, I would have enough moral integrity to say no. These people should have also had enough moral integrity to say no. Look, anyone who I was already done with David Pakman and Brian Tyler Cohen and all of these people who weren't saying a goddamn word about the Gaza genocide while Joe Biden was president, and barely have still talked about it under Trump's presidency, and in some cases have actually actively supported Israel. That already was the sign that these people were completely corrupted. In terms of their beliefs, if not their financial interests. So that was already the end of the line for me with most of these people. And the reality is that this news has just further increased that. For the full story, go and read the Wired article. It's an impressive piece of journalism, and no corrections have been made to it. So despite all of the denials, no corrections have been made to it. We'll continue following that story as well because it's fascinating from the perspective of an online left commentator. The other story that we're going to cover is RFK Jr. and his testimony before the Senate. Because, wow. If you haven't watched it, go and watch some of the clips, reels that are out there. The things that he says are absolutely bonkers crazy. He lies repeatedly while accusing the senators questioning him of lying. He completely discounts scientific reality and facts. This was a bipartisan attack on him. You had Republican senators who also, some of whom are doctors, going after him on his anti-vaccine beliefs because they're wrong. They're fundamentally and completely wrong, and he's lying, and it is hurting people and killing people and making it hard for people to get the COVID vaccine because of his belief that healthcare policy and science policy in the United States should be based on what he believes rather than what the scientific community at large agrees is true. And that's a notion that is actually dangerous. It's wrong and it needs to be stopped for good. It's really not a good situation. It's really not. And so this Senate panel, this Senate committee going after him in the way that they did was great because it attacked him in the ways that he needed to be attacked. And it also, the fact that there were Republicans asking questions that only Republicans could ask on this committee means that this is an area where they are having some courage to actually stand up to this Trump administration. And maybe we'll see some relief and the firing of RFK Jr. and replacing him with, not a great secretary, because it's still Donald Trump and it's still going to be someone who believes in fundamentally a lot of the same things from a policy perspective, but at least somebody who isn't going to actively be trying to destroy the entire Center for Disease Control. That might be something worth considering. Okay, so I will be joined in just a moment by Dr. Laura Morlock to discuss the situation in Gaza and Israel in a little bit more detail, to discuss the history of Zionism and where it currently operates in the world. And we'll also be talking about the Freedom Flotilla that is currently going on, sailing to Gaza to try to break the siege. So stick around. Here's the theme song, and when we come back, we'll be joined by Dr. Laura Morlock.
No suits, no script, just heat on the mic. Noam's in the chair, calling out the hype with guest co-hosts, keeping it raw. Politics, power, no holds barred. It's no power panel, we say it loud. Crack through the headlines, cut through the crowd, laugh through the chaos, burn through the spin. If you're not angry, are you even tuned in? This is the No Power Panel. Let's begin.
All right, now I'm joined by Dr. Laura Morlock, who is here to go over some of the big news around Israel, Gaza, and all of that, and also dive into a bit of the history of the region, and share some thoughts around what is currently happening and how it reflects back on everything that has already happened. So I want to just start here because I think it's what a lot of people's immediate reaction is when you bring this topic up, which is October 7th, because I just want to get it out of the way, and then we can move on to the actually important stuff. But I'm going to approach this a little bit differently than most people approach this when talking to someone, which is, Laura, did the world begin on October 7th, 2023?
Absolutely. Yep. 100%. October 6th, the world did not exist, and everything came into being on October 7th. And we've gone from there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Nothing before it matters.
Stop recording. We're done. That's the whole.
We're done. Okay.
Everything started on October 7th. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's move on to talking about the actual history of
actual facts
and actual history. See how that works, mainstream media? You ask about it and then ask about the stuff that actually matters.
Well, and to be clear, I mean, and I come as co-director of Mennonite Action. I am a Mennonite. I am a deeply religious person personally. And like, and not in a way to do the qualifiers we always need. I say, as a human being, the events of October 7th were horrific because human life is sacred. Full stop. That's a full stop. You know, there's neither
100%.
more nuance needed or less. And all human life is sacred. You know, the lives that were lost on October 7th do not matter any more than the lives that were lost for the 75 years leading up to October 7th, or the thousands of years or since then. And of course, we have a completely disproportionate grieving of victims in North America, in, quote, the West, about which lives get named, like individualized, and are mourned publicly, and which ones are just numbers and statistics. And, you know, that's what they do. They die.
Absolutely. And I want to be clear, like, on this podcast, we have multiple times condemned what happened on October 7th.
Of course.
I
it's
just
the equivalization that's the problem. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I make light of it to make light of the equivalization, not
exactly. You're not making light of the events. No, I know you're not.
Exactly. I just want to, for anyone out there who's going to try and misconstrue,
intentionally misunderstand. Yeah. No, exactly.
Exactly.
No, and also very hard for folks to understand sometimes. It is possible to hold multiple truths. It is possible to say that every life lost on October 7th was an entire universe and beloved by human beings who cared about them and mourned them and lost them or missed them, sorry. And there were decades that led up to this moment that were unsustainable. And the lives lost since then, every one of those, hundreds of thousands, also matter individually. It is possible to hold both truths, you know?
Absolutely. No, that's exactly right. And so that's why I wanted to start there. But let's then go further back to
October
the decades
6th.
and decades that led up to that event. And in particular, I want to start kind of, if we can, with the Balfour Declaration, which I think is when a lot of people talk about the kind of modern history of the region, kind of a launching point for that. Can you just kind of give a brief explanation as to what the Balfour Declaration was for anyone listening who doesn't know?
Yeah, absolutely. So Balfour is a man's name, is Lord Balfour. He was a British member of the House of Lords. And I don't know how much you've gone into depth in this in previous episodes that your listeners may have heard, but let's assume people are just starting from here. The modern Zionist movement, as it exists as a political entity, really started in the late 19th century and started primarily, or rather, it really gained traction primarily in the United Kingdom. British Jewish people were simultaneously very well established. They had what we call a lot of social capital, meaning that they had established property ownership. They had social connections in powerful places. Not all, but many of them had accrued wealth and therefore in the British system, social standing. And at the same time, there was still virulent anti-Semitism in the British system. It looked very different than it did in Eastern Europe and places like that where Jewish people were ghettoized and physically assaulted. You don't at this point have that in Great Britain. It's more the gentrified version of racism and hatred and anti-Semitism, where they're just excluded. It's, the House of Lords didn't want their daughters marrying Jewish people, even if they had friends who were wealthy. They weren't marrying them, which we always say is sort of the ultimate integration sign, if the people in power accept their daughters marrying into the community or the community marrying. So this is the position of the people that's really landing and resonating with. They have enough education and power in their lives to expect better, while feeling the frustration and anger and pain of being intentionally excluded because they're Jewish. And that is anti-Semitism 101. So the original founders, their vision was not that the ideal was a separate Jewish homeland. Their ideal was full integration into European society, but they didn't believe that was possible. And so as option B, they felt that the next option, best option, would be a homeland of their own, where they could, so to speak, have their own House of Lords. Lord Balfour, so they start using their social influence, their friendships and things like this, not in a nefarious way, but in the same way that people who are minoritized in pretty much any liberal democracy use the behind the scenes conversations to start pushing what they would like to see happen. At that time, the Northern European Zionist movement did not solely have their eyes set on Palestine. They also considered Utah, parts of Utah. They considered Uganda. They were looking at a few different land opportunities. But of course, Palestine was on the list for obvious reasons of Jewish history and diaspora and expulsion, about circa 2,000 years before at this point, a little bit less. Lord Balfour was the British Lord at the time of the British Mandate in Palestine. So when the British defeated the Ottoman Empire, they then also got the land that the Ottomans had been ruling, and that included the Mandate of Palestine. So at that point in the early 20th century, the Mandate of Palestine is under British rule. And the British Zionist movement approaches the British powers that be and say, hey, so here's this vision that we have. Here's the situation we find ourselves in. Guess who owns Palestine now? Quote, owns Palestine, because we're in the age of empire. We do. How great is that? So we think that you should give us Palestine, and then it can be our homeland again. And Balfour, in essence, goes, that makes a lot of sense. So he writes a letter stating that ultimately he believes that the British would do well to return, quote, return the land of Palestine to the Jewish people. There is acknowledgement of Arab Palestinians. At this time, Jewish people there called themselves Arab or Palestinian Jews, or just Jews. There wasn't the distinction at that point that there is now. That came after the 40s. But at that time, there was acknowledgement of the non-Jewish population. But in essence, the message of the Balfour Declaration was we should give Palestine to the Jewish people. But of course, the core question there is, was it Britain's to give in the first place? They had taken over a colony that had been run by the Ottomans previous to that.
Absolutely. So that's a key point that I want to highlight, is that Palestine was colonized territory by the British. It wasn't that
Correct.
It was okay, perfect.
That's also why they were interested in some of the other territories, because this is the age of empire. And so Britain has a massive empire around the world of colonies. And it's sort of a buffet. They're sort of going, which of our colonies
which
best
to take from?
Which it's kind of like, I like a little bit of what's going on here. I like a little bit of what's going on here. Don't know if I love the climate there, And it's not that Palestine was just nothing to them. Of course, there's a deep Jewish connection to the land that is there and has been for millennia. Like, no one's saying that's not true, that there's no Jewish connection there. But it is true that the political mandate of the earliest Zionist movement was not centered on Palestine. And at that point, again, their primary goal would have been full integration to Europe. They didn't see it as possible. This is pre-Holocaust. And they were fully Northern European. This is something that really has to be understood. They were, while not fully accepted, fully integrated into British society, mindset, education system. They were empirists. They were colonists. They believe, and they weren't shy about that. This is the thing that's rewritten in the modern understanding, is that now that colonies and colonialism is, quote, bad thing, at the time it was just a political system. And as Brits, they absolutely felt that they were entitled to pick from British colonies. Palestine made a lot of sense to them for a lot of reasons. Balfour agreed. And so that's when the British say, yeah, you can have this of our many colonies.
Okay, perfect. So then let's fast forward to following World War II and the Holocaust, to the actual creation of what is now known as the State of Israel, which was done by a UN declaration. And what kind of led up in the Zionist movement at that time? Both the Jewish Zionist movement, which of course was interested in finding somewhere where they could feel safe, and the Christian Zionist movement. And maybe if you want to touch on a little bit of that, given your roles and your background, as to what actually motivated that creation and the immediate events thereafter.
My smirk is like, how long do we have to get into Christian Zionism? So,
absolutely. Historical
arc. At the turn of the 1900s, the vast majority of the population, I should know these numbers, I want to say it's like 84%, but it's somewhere in the 80s, is what we now would say Arab Palestinians. And I think it was around 14%, 14, 20, somewhere in there, was Jewish. And then there's a small minority of Zoroastrians, Druze, Christians. Christians are the largest minority, but they're a minority. and Bedouin and so forth. As things are getting worse in Europe, and as the Zionist movement is growing, you have more migration to Palestine from European Jewish people. It wasn't the first migration. I mean, the Sephardic Jews came en masse with the expulsion of Spain and so forth. So for some clarification, since the 40s, Jewish people who can trace their ancestry in what is now the state of Israel prior to the creation of the state are called Mizrahi Jews. And then from that, you have the Ashkenazi coming from Europe, you have Sephardic, you have Ethiopian, you have India. I mean, like, there's Jewish people all over the world. That's the nature of diaspora. Mm-hmm. So as things are getting worse, as Jewish people are migrating towards Palestine, European Jewish people in particular, at first, the Palestinian Arabs are welcoming them. And they are seeing that they're coming from persecution. And they've had centuries of Jewish people being their neighbors. At this point, you don't have, it's very much a modern mindset, how we think of, oh, you know, it's biblical, it's entrenched, these people always hate each other. It's not true. Most of the history was quite peaceful, quite collaborative. But the sentiment is shifting through the 20th century as more and more European Jewish people are coming. There's a direct analogy to indigenous North Americans, welcoming Europeans who are coming from horrible situations. And then they're starting to go, hold on a second. this is not maybe going how we thought it was going to go. And as there's establishment of Jewish settlements, literally what they call Jewish settlements, and they're expanding the landmass, tensions start to rise, and you start having violent clashes between Jewish people in Israel, particularly European, but not only, and Arab Palestinians. And there's violence on both sides, not both sidisms, but there is violence directed in both directions. There are several, I'm thinking of 3 in particular, but labeled by the British government Zionist terrorist organizations. They set bombs. They are particularly at that point focused on the British ruling class and anybody who allies with them. So they're setting bombs in nightclubs where British officers frequent and things like that. But they also don't want Arabs in the land, these extremists in particular. Then you have the Holocaust and the absolute horrific destruction of human life, particularly focused on Jewish people, but of course not only Jewish people, political prisoners, gay people, Roma people, Black people. But this catastrophic destruction leaves non-Jewish Europeans a little shell-shocked because they did know the Holocaust was happening. They didn't know the full extent because, of course, they didn't have the technology that we have today. So they knew it was bad. They had people in the resistance who had escaped, but they didn't know how bad until the camps are liberated. And at that point, their guilt kicks in overdrive. This is also part of, in the wake of World War II, not only because of the Holocaust, but the Holocaust was a huge impetus of this, pusher of this. Through the 40s and 50s, you have this global, massive push towards human rights for the first time. And could be a whole other podcast on this, but that is the decade, the window that establishes what we call the human rights world order that we have today. International human rights law, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, all the things that the UN has created around international law and the Nuremberg trials, all of this comes out of this push because before that, nationalism was the world order. And they started saying, okay, what has nationalism brought us? Nationalism has brought us World War I, which was supposed to be the war to end all wars, and it has brought us World War II and the previously unseen human cost across Asia, Europe, North Africa, the Middle East. They've never seen devastation to this degree. And so they want to do things differently. And so this is where you have this formation. From this impulse comes the desire to help the Jewish people who have suffered so much. And into this void or newness, you have voices from the Northern European Zionist movement saying this is the solution. Clearly, we can't trust you to protect us. evidence is all around us, so we need to be able to protect ourselves. And that later shifts in terminology to self-determination. At that point, self-determination wasn't really a buzzword like it is, and the mass returning of colonies is still about a decade to 2 decades away. So at this point, it's about we need to be able to protect ourselves. And the Zionist Northern European movement was largely secular. They weren't particularly religious. There were religious elements, but it wasn't so much about biblical narrative as it was about political power and the ability to, quote, like I say, have a House of Lords of their own to decide for themselves, because clearly we can't trust you. And that's fair,
Yeah,
Europe
absolutely.
and the West had absolutely crapped the bed big on that one. So you have this European age of empire. Americans in particular, Canadians played a really large role in the establishment of the human rights world order. We had a disproportionate number of judges and lawyers involved in the Nuremberg trials and the creation of the ICC and the ICJ. It was very much moving into the Canadian zeitgeist at that point. In America, they're coming around to this, but they're coming from a very different perspective than either Canadians or Europeans. They're coming from a very Christian nationalist worldview. And Jewish Americans, who have a long history of anti-Semitism there as well, very much in many ways analogous to like it was in Northern Europe, a little bit of regional variance, but they also have a loss of social capital at this point, while also living in a very anti-Semitic society. Canada was also deeply anti-Semitic at this point, just to be clear. I'm talking about what the political zeitgeist were, but both were very anti-Semitic. The American Jewish community, though, like the British Jewish community, has social capital. They have some wealth accrued. They may not be allowed into the clubs, but they have their own clubs in New York City and in places like this. So they're not allowed into the halls of power, but they have established halls of power, which they use to influence. They have just lost family and friends in unimaginable numbers. Mm-hmm. This dovetails with Christian Americans' resurgence of interest in Jewish people as maybe not the Antichrist. Not saying not saying they're not, but maybe they're not. And this is actually when you have the formation of the word Judeo-Christian. And that was actually a whole other thing, but in relation to a specific political campaign with the Catholic community. And so there's this complete reimagining that we're in this together. Jesus was Jewish, and Jewish people are God's chosen people. Maybe they're not the Antichrist. Maybe they're God's chosen people. I mean, like, we're the real chosen people, but like they're the original chosen people. And so you have at this point American Christian people feeling terrible about what has happened. European, we'll call them Christian. I mean, they identified as Christian, but it's a very, very different form of Christianity than American Christianity. And we're going to use our good Christian feeling to help the Jewish people. Jewish Zionists in Northern Europe and Jewish Zionists in America are using their social influence to say, here's the solution. We need a place where we can protect ourselves. And American Christians go, you know what else that would do? That would bring about the fulfillment of the rapture. These American Christians in particular, this is not really on the radar for the European powers that be. But the Americans look at this and go, this is an opportunity for us too. So, in essence, Europeans look at the formation of Palestine becoming the state of Israel as a place for Jewish people to go to solve their Jewish problem. Europeans have a lot of Jewish people living there. And if they truly cared, they did feel guilty. That is true. They felt horrible about what had happened in the Holocaust under their watch. But not bad enough to change their society, and not bad enough to actually undo their anti-Semitism. They felt terrible what had happened to Jewish people, but they did not want the Jewish people living in their neighborhoods. And if they had genuinely wanted to make a better future for Jewish people after the Holocaust, why did not a single European nation say, then come here? You're welcome here. We will keep you safe. We will make sure this is your home. Come home. These are European countries. These are European Jewish people who have been all deported to the camps. Come home. We will make this nation safe for you. We will deconstruct, they wouldn't have used that word, but we will deconstruct our centuries of anti-Semitism. We've learned our lesson. We're really sorry. Let's fix this. Not a single European nation did that because they were still very anti-Semitic. They felt terrible about what had happened to the Jewish people, but they didn't want the Jewish people. So Israel creates a solution for them. So it's actually rooted in a very deeply anti-Semitic approach from Europeans. In America, they're also anti-Semitic, but theirs is going in a different direction. Theirs is the creation of what is modern Christian nationalism and Christian Zionism. And Christian Zionism, which I need to define Christian Zionism here, there is disproportionate focus on Jewish Zionism. Jewish Zionism, as we've already talked about, and it comes from a very specific historical and economic context, cultural context. Christian Zionism is a much nastier beast, and it's much larger, and it's much more funded than Jewish Zionism is. Christian Zion, particularly in the United States, Christian Zionism is at its core a primarily evangelical American theology that centers on the final book of the Greek Bible, also called the New Testament, which in this camp, theological camp, believes describes the end times. And in the end times, there will come the rapture. And in the rapture, Jesus comes back. First comes the Antichrist, then Jesus comes back and rises all the believers, the true believers, i.e., good Christians. Everyone who's alive, if they're a, quote, good Christian, will instantly go to heaven. That's the rapture. Everyone else gets to decide. You can either prove your worth as a good Christian by fighting the battles of the end times, or you go to the eternal pit of despair. Funny in this, you'll notice the Jewish people are not accounted for exactly.
I was about to point that out as a Jewish person.
You're like, so what happens to us, right? Well, you know what? It's best, don't look behind that curtain. It's best not to ask. So this theology also names that one of the signs of the end times, which, to be clear, this branch, not all evangelicals, but this branch of evangelical Christianity wants the end time to come because it means the second coming of Christ and the new heaven and the new earth and paradise forever and end of all bad things. Interestingly, because it involves a lot of death of people, but that's okay. They're bad people. So for this to happen, one of the signs of the end times is that the Jewish people of the world must return to Israel. And so when the state of Israel is formed, these American Christians get real excited real quick because, oh my gosh, it's happening. It's coming. Jesus is coming back. Get the cart ready. We're going to heaven, because no one ever thinks they're not part of the rapture. Let's be clear about that. So they need all the Jewish people to be in Israel, and for Israel, in their world understanding, to be a nation state in the modern sense of the world, though of course that was nowhere mentioned in the Bible, so that Jesus can come back. But what happens to all these Jewish people once they get to Israel? You know, there's this, we love Jewish people, they're our allies, we want to support, we need Israel to be Jewish. It needs to be a Jewish nation state. That's what God has ordained. This is the Christian Zionist belief. But what happens to the Jewish people once Jesus comes back and the rapture happens? Well, you don't need to worry about that, because either you can choose to convert and then be a good Christian believer also, and you too can spend eternity in paradise. Sounding familiar, anyone? Or if you're stubborn of heart and refuse to become Christian, well then I'm sorry, but you also are going to spend eternity in hell, and that's really unfortunate for you, but you had your chance. So, yes, your facial expression is correct. So, this is a deeply rooted in anti-Semitic belief, but it's packaged in a very loving of Jewish people and the state of Israel, and loving Jewish people through loving the state of Israel. And this is not fringe. And this is what's so terrifying and so powerful. There are hundreds of millions of Christians who believe this in America and Canada. But America, of course, is the belly of the beast in terms of the funding and the formation of the state of Israel. The state of Israel could not exist as it does without American support. Britain had the political power, but America had the economic power. America is what made Israel as a state possible and still does. Christian nationalists are in power in the United States. Christian nationalists have been in power before. The Bush administration was also run by Christian nationalists and Christian Zionists. But this new brand is on steroids in their beliefs around what God wants and expects of them. And so I want to reiterate the point that the people with the real power, the money and the numbers and the political influence are not en masse Jewish Americans or Jewish Zionists. They are Christian Zionists. And while they both use the word Zionist because it means Israel being a Jewish state, they mean very different things by it. But they have built an allyship, Christian Zionists, because they need the Jewish people to fulfill their prophecy as they understand it. And the Jewish people, in large part because many of them are secular, and they're like, okay, you believe that if you want, that's cute. But, they're not dumb. It's like, all right, that's cute. You have that belief if you want to, but just keep writing the checks.
Right.
And others don't know that that's the belief system behind it. And just for the record, that is an interpretation of what the book of Revelation says. Greek scholars would say, like Greek Bible scholars would say, no, it's actually about the fall of the Roman Empire. And it was when John was exiled to the island of Padua and wrote this letter in code back to the churches about the fall of Rome. But, let's ignore history. Let's just focus on...
Once again, when did history start?
That's right. When did history start? Exactly. We prefer the apocalyptic version where we all get to wear sweater vests for eternity.
Just joyous. So I want to move into the political side of this a little bit. And I just want to clarify for the audience that Christian Zionists, while many of them are Christian nationalists who are Republicans, there are a large number who are still Democrats. This
Absolutely.
is not
Absolutely.
a partisan issue in the United States. So this isn't something where you can say, well, Trump's crazy Christian supporters are whatever. But, I think back a lot on the phrase that Joe Biden said over and over and over again in office, which is that if Israel didn't exist, then Jewish people wouldn't be safe anywhere.
Yeah. What a horrific statement. Yeah.
And as a Jewish person, I've talked about this on the podcast before, so I won't go into, my usual rant about it. But that just is one of the deeply most upsetting things you could hear from a political leader, because it translates to that you shouldn't be safe in your own country. And that is something that, as you've explained, you can understand where with anti-Semitic statements like that, Jewish Zionism has the element of feeling like this is necessary. I guess what I want to point out is I feel like maybe the effort should be on making everywhere safe for people of religions versus just trying to shift the problem off on people who were already occupying a space of land.
What a radical thought, Noam. It's almost like in Europe after the Holocaust. This was their home. They'd been there for thousands of years at this point. They were thoroughly Polish and German and French and Dutch. And instead of saying, this is your home, we're sorry we failed you, they said, wow, that was really bad. Why don't you move somewhere else?
This place clearly not for you. Gave it a shot.
Maybe you should stay here.
It's a radical notion that people should be safe in their own countries, apparently, but certainly one that I would like to be pushing more, and so I bring it up when it comes up. All right, so what is the current kind of state of play with Christian Zionism, and just your in general thoughts unfiltered, because I'm curious.
Let me just stretch here.
Yeah.
The number one word that comes to mind for me is hypocrisy. So this week we've seen the destruction, the conscious, intentional destruction of the last Christian neighborhood in Gaza. The Christians, if people have been following this closely, they were refusing to leave their church. The church leaders, the congregants, people who were sheltering there were refusing to leave when the IDF told them to leave, because they knew that this was the last stand of Christianity in Gaza. And I have Palestinian Christian friends, and one of the things that's very interesting to me is they have very different relationships with Muslims than North American Christians, because they're like, we're all in this together, Palestinian Muslims, Palestinian Christians, it's not like there's a huge different lived experience for them. And they're forgotten. They are forgotten that they even exist. And I want to be really clear. I am not in any way, shape, or form saying Christian lives matter more than Muslim or Zoroastrian or Druze or atheist lives at all. What I am saying is the blatant hypocrisy of Western Christians, either in their silence, which is just as deadly. Oh, well, that's the mainstream cross, if you will, because intentional irony there, because they just don't get involved. They just don't say anything. And then the Christian Zionists, who are allegedly so concerned about Christian life, and these are the same people that you hear complaining when refugee sponsorship groups are bringing Muslims. Well, why are we doing that when they're Christians? I hear this. I've worked in refugee issues. There are Christians that are being persecuted. Why aren't we saving them as a Christian organization? Things like this. It's what we call the Palestinian exception. People who have liberal ideologies or human rights oriented ideologies for everyone except Palestinians. And Christian nationalists don't pretend to have that orientation, but they do overtly talk about Christian safety, Christian lives. We are proudly Christian. We are here to promote and elevate. They don't see it as Christians, but as Jesus. Anything they do for Christians, they're doing for Christ. And yet, not a peep this last week as the last Christian community, which is the oldest in the world. The Palestinian Christians are literally the OG Christians. Jesus was a Palestinian. Like, this is where it all happened. Nazareth, Bethlehem. Not a peep from these Christians who allegedly care so much about Jesus and Jesus' people and the Jewish people and Christians, and Muslims are the Antichrist, and Muslims are dangerous, and Muslims are our enemies. Well, it's not the Muslims who are killing the Gazan Christians, or what's happening in the West Bank to the Christians there. Absolutely horrific, and it's only getting worse. The hypocrisy oozing out of this theology and out of the lived actions of these Christian churches. I said this morning, this is like, I don't claim to speak for Jesus, but I think this is a table flipping kind of situation of frustration and anger, because I just want to say, what Bible do you read? Like, which Bible are you reading where you think Jesus drops bombs on children in their homes, or anyone in their homes for that matter? It's not just children. Men also matter. Women matter. So it's all interconnected. The Christian nationalists pushing out of immigrants in the United States, the loosely termed detention centers that are really just funneling prisons, and they're not death camps, but they're concentration camps by the academic definition of them. No due process. It's all part of the same struggle. And Christian nationalism, the academic in me doesn't differentiate between whether someone is of their religion or not. Like, if you self-identify as religion X, then that's what you are. But the Christian in me, the Mennonite in me, absolutely denounces Christian nationalism, Christian Zionism as heresies. They are the antithesis of every piece of core theology that we have in Christianity, going back 2,000 years. And the misuse of Jewish people, they never repented of their anti-Semitism. They never repented of these years of hatred. They haven't really gotten rid of them. They've just reshaped them into something that looks friendly and welcoming. But I always talk to Black people. I'm not racist. I always talk to Black people. It's the same mentality. To be really clear, this is why I think it's so important. I don't think my job is to speak to Jewish people about Jewish Zionism. That's an internal conversation that you all are having internally. And, you know, there might be
and I'll speak about that in a moment.
Yeah, I would say. And there might be something about a history of debate within Judaism. I don't know. I feel like maybe there's something in there about tradition of Jewish people debating about what Judaism is. Like maybe that's been done before. I will say that one of the crimes of the formation of the state of Israel, beyond the really obvious ones that we're aware of, is the flattening of Jewish identity to one thing. That before the state of Israel, Iraqi Jews, Indian Jews, Ethiopian Jews, they all had their own languages, their own cultures, their own ways of celebrating holidays. And when they came to Israel in the 50s and the 60s, there was this massive push. You must speak this language. You must celebrate the holidays this way. You must do this. And guess who decided what that looks like? Europeans. It was the European tradition. Again, let's remember, they were thoroughly European. They had the European mindset. They weren't exempt from it. But within Christianity, my job is to name and call out Christian Zionism and Christian nationalism as a Christian, and to have these conversations and these discussions and these arguments to deconstruct, because they're so loud and they're so powerful that it's very easy to believe that that's what Christianity believes, that's what Christianity teaches, that's what Christianity is. And at Mennonite Action, we are vocally opposed to that. And the Mennonite Church overall, there are exceptions, but Mennonites for decades have been opposed to these because it is the antithesis of what we believe Jesus taught us. So yeah, I have what do they say? I brook no support of Christian nationalism or Christian Zionism.
Thank you for saying that, and for your thoughts on that in particular. I have shared on the podcast in the past where I stand on Zionism and on Jewish Zionism. So I mean, most of last week's episode was largely about that. I reacted to Lindsay Ellis's video about this topic and Miss Rachel and all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
So, listeners, watchers, if you want my full thoughts on it, please check out that episode. It's available edited on YouTube, and the full reaction is available on my Patreon, which you can join for just $5 a month. Get that plug in there. But because
Absolutely.
we have slightly touched on Jewish Zionism and some of the valid reasons for its origins in this episode, I just want to clarify that Jewish Zionism of today is very different than Jewish Zionism of the past. Jewish Zionism of today is about trying to form a greater Israel. That is the language that is used in Jewish Zionism, and it is despicable, it is disgusting, it is colonial, it is genocidal. Jewish Zionism has created the apartheid state of Israel into the genocidal terrorist state that it is now, and it is not Jewish. Jewish values, according to the Talmud, begin and end with Tikkun Olam. It is the core tenet of what our religion is, and Jewish Zionism is an absolute heresy and despicable, disgusting hypocrisy of Tikkun Olam. It does not in any way, shape, or form represent the religion that I have been and love for my entire life. So that is just in brief my take on Jewish Zionism. Feel free to check out past episodes if you want more Noam rants about the topic, because I will never stop about it.
Well, it makes me think, Peter Beinart in his book Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza, which I can't recommend enough. It is
Absolutely.
a beautiful, powerful book. But he names in it something I hadn't put together before, that to sit in the Knesset, you don't have to be religiously Jewish, but you do have to be Zionist. And he's naming that. So what does it mean to be a Jewish state then? Does it mean to be Jewish in a religious sense? And, I'm not gatekeeping, and I understand that just like with Mennonites, there are cultural Jewish people, there are cultural Mennonites who maybe don't hold the theology. That's not what I'm talking about. His point is deflating that balloon that, of Christian Zionism too, that, this is a Jewish nation. No, it's a Zionist nation, which is not inherently the same thing. There's overlap that you've talked about, but you don't have to be religious, but you do have to be a Zionist, which means you can be a overtly devout, conservative Jewish person who follows the strictest of Jewish law and tenet, and not be allowed to sit in government if you don't hold Zionist values. But you can be an atheist and not believe in any of the Talmud or Torah or any of and observe none of the rules or practices or traditions. But if you're a Zionist, then you're welcome in government. I want to bring it back because anti-Semitism is by no means limited to Christian Zionists within Christianity. It's so steeped in our tradition and how we interpret the Bible and what we're taught in Sunday school. Even people who do not have any form of overt, they would never say they're anti-Semitic. I have nothing against Jewish people, but they still believe in supersessionism, which is the Christian theology that Christianity replaces Judaism, that God ended his covenant with the Jewish people and started the new covenant, which is with Christians. And the Jewish people are like, well, I don't hate you, but you're just kind of out in the cold. So good luck to you all, So that supersessionism is inextricably linked into Christian nationalism and Christian Zionism. It's that we need Jewish people to fulfill our prophecy, but it's ours. It's not yours, And I don't mean in the sense it's not part of your tradition. I mean, God's covenant is with us. It's not with you anymore. And so I want to really name the Christians. Anyone who calls themselves Christian needs to be deep in learning and understanding around what ways does anti-Semitism still crop up in our tradition in ways that aren't ghettos and aren't Good Friday pogroms.
Well, and what's so wild about it for me, about the partnership between Christian Zionism and Jewish Zionism, is like, as Jewish people, these are not concepts that are strange or out there or right? It's wild to me how you can be talking to a Jewish Zionist and they'll tell you a story about a Christian Zionist coming up to them and saying something that's just like blaringly dog whistle anti-Semitic, even if that Christian person doesn't interpret it as that.
Oh yeah, they're smiling.
Exactly. And the Jewish person will be saying, "Oh yeah, that was wildly crazy that this happened." And at the same time, they'll be talking about the Christian Zionists that are helping in terms of Israel and the support for Israel. And it's like there's a disconnect in the brain that Jewish people allow Christian people to get away with anti-Semitism. I mean, and like the linking of Israel with Judaism is the most offensive act of anti-Semitism that I have personally ever experienced. And this is coming from someone who, for almost an entire grade, had a classmate tell him that he wished that he could put me in an oven. Like, and still I go, yeah, but that was what that was. That was just, that was anti-Semitic, and it was wrong, and it was its own kind of fucked up problematic. but it wasn't saying to me your entire religion is based around genocide, which is what the Zionists, both Jewish and Christian, are now trying to, in weaponizing anti-Semitism allegations, that is inherent to that argument.
Absolutely.
And I am right now in a bit of a local fight with our local member of parliament, because he is refusing to meet with me to discuss how his party, the Conservative Party of Canada, is anti-Semitic in what it is saying. So I just want to say, John Nader, because I'm saying this everywhere, John Nader, meet with me. Let's settle this. Let's put an end to this. Until then, I will continue calling you what you are, which is an anti-Semite.
It's a pattern of talking about Jewish people, and it's not in any way unique to Jewish people, and it's absolutely true with Palestinians also, and any minoritized or racialized groups. Let's say that we are on their side, and let's talk about them. But let's not actually listen to what they have to say to us. It's best this way. We know best. Don't worry about it. We've got your back. We've got you covered. Not super interested in what you have to say about that, especially if you disagree. So please just go away quietly while I protect you.
All right, let's touch on the current good stuff that's happening in relation to this. Which is that the Freedom Flotilla, the Sumud Freedom Flotilla, is currently on its way from Barcelona to Tunisia, where they are meeting up with, I believe, dozens more vessels that are from Arab and African countries. They're being joined by the grandson of Nelson Mandela, who's going to be journeying to help. The goal of having these prominent individuals as a part of it, aside from the fact that they're human beings who want to help, but like the grandson of Nelson Mandela and Greta Thunberg and various other celebrities who are aboard, Susan Sarandon, I believe, is a part of this one, is to try to stop Israel from obstructing these flotillas, which hasn't worked up until now.
But it's such a beautiful enactment of nonviolent resistance.
Absolutely.
And one of the beautiful things about nonviolent resistance is you force the other person to show their hand.
Yeah, I mean, it's blatant war crimes that they commit every time that they stop one of these. It's illegal to stop in international waters a civilian vessel. Under the ICJ's provisional orders around this crisis, this genocide, it's illegal for Israel to prevent any aid from reaching Gaza whatsoever, which of course we know they do on a daily basis. But it's wonderful that they are sailing and that they are hopefully going to make their journey complete, even though they haven't up until this point. The hope is that in having a number of boats this time, that'll happen. I'm interested in your take around what the dock workers in Italy have said, which is that if Israel interferes
shut down Europe.
With flotilla, they will shut down Europe. So they are making it clear that they are going to not allow this to happen.
I think it is so moving and so beautiful, and again, beautiful nonviolent resistance and effective AF that there's been a lot of parallels drawn between South Africa and the political structure and realities on the ground in Israel and Palestine, and including by people who are involved in both movements. Like Jeff Halper, the Israeli anthropologist, was very involved in the end of apartheid in South Africa. He's one of the founders of Israeli Coalition Against Housing Demolition. And he said in a talk last year that we're about where they were in the mid 80s, late 80s, in terms of global awareness and pushing resistance and how far it's come. But one of the things that's true about the South African end of apartheid, it was not that one day white South Africans en masse woke up and said, you know what, this is unjust. We should probably stop having apartheid. Like, that's not how human rights movements change. It was actually the straw that broke the camel's back. And there was decades of labor that went into this. But the final straw was the South African white business community applying pressure to the government, saying, we can't do business anymore. We have so much economic pressure, we can't do business anymore. And that was really what turned the final tide. The ability and the willingness of dock workers, which, and I want to be really clear, I'm not being classist in this. What I'm saying is that it demonstrates this is not esoteric of only academics or only professional activists or only people who've made their life's work writing or anything like this. These are dock workers. These are blue collar workers who are saying this is wrong and we're not going to allow this to continue. And we can't do everything, but the one thing we can do is this one thing, and we will do this thing. And I find that both incredibly, like, morally and emotionally moving and powerful. And as I said, effective AF, because if they can bring Europe economically to its knees, even for a day or two, the loss of billions of euros in business pockets is what moves the dial on these things.
Absolutely. So I just want to say to workers in Canada and the United States and Mexico and South America and Africa and Asia and the rest of Europe and Australia, take a note. This is the way that this change is going to happen. We've talked in the past on this podcast about the need for a general strike in terms of so many different issues politically around the world. This is one of them. Right? Like the power that workers have to change the world is unmatched by any other group or class of people.
And we just had Labor Day. So celebrate Labor Day.
Exactly. Celebrate Labor Day. Tell your bosses that you are not working, that you are putting up your hands and you are standing still until they start applying pressure to their governments and to their business interests in Israel to stop the apartheid state and stop the genocide.
It also puts a lie to, or negates, I don't put it more gently, the idea that, well, I'm only one person, what can I do? And that is an understanding feeling of overwhelm in the face of genocide and massive, massive global systems of oppression. It's true, but we are all interconnected. We are all interconnected. The struggles are universal and global. Palestinians are a testing ground, and this is not limited to Palestinians. Even if it was, that's worthy of stopping it. But don't think that it stops there. And we are all interconnected. And the ability of dock workers, or, I mean, there's been other examples where cargo crews have refused to load weapons to Israel, things like that. Anywhere you can throw sand in the gear of genocide, throw the sand. It's death by 1,000 cuts that brings massive systems down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I hate to have to do this because I could talk about this issue with you forever, and I'd love to have you back to continue the conversation. But we do have to move on to our final segment for this episode, which is, of course, winners and losers of the week. Listeners, watchers know that this is our segment that we release every week as a part of the podcast and as its own video. So just because it's going to be its own video for people, I'll welcome and I'll let our listeners know that this week for winners and losers of the week, I'm joined by Dr. Laura Morlock. For her full bio and introduction, please check out our full episode where we've been talking about the Israel-Gaza situation and the history of the area and the Zionist movements around it. But we're going to move into winners and losers of the week now. Laura, generally we start with losers so that we end on a positive note. So who is going to be your loser for this week?
So I elect North American and really any Christians who have claimed at any point in their life to have concern for Christian suffering around the world as somehow more worthy of our attention, and yet have been completely, if not only silent, actively funding and supporting the genocide of Palestinian Christians in Gaza this week in particular.
Perfect. Absolutely. That's a very valid one for this week in particular and for in general. My loser for the week, going slightly off from our main topic, is going to be Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Oh.
The United States Secretary of Health and Human Services, and I can't even believe that those words came out of my mouth in relation to this man, testified before the Senate committee this week and was absolutely demolished by Democratic and Republican senators, including 2 Republican doctor senators, which was just amazing to see. And he lied and contradicted himself again and again and again, and they just completely went at him. And I don't see how he can stay in his job after this, both from a fundamental perspective. It's just like he's lost all credibility that he may have had in the first place. And in addition, just from a purely like instinctual political perspective, Donald Trump exists for Donald Trump himself. And when you're in the sphere of Trump and you stop performing, especially on television where he exists and he actually does understand the TV world, he stops caring about you. And when he stops caring about you, you're out. It's just a matter of time. So I think either through resignation or through just a lazy tweet firing him one day, that is very much in the future now for RFK Jr. So he's my loser for this week.
Interesting.
All right, now let's move into winners of the week. Who is your winner this week, Laura?
Honestly, it's hard to choose for me because there's so, I mean, there's the Sumud participants, there's the, and again, not to elevate Christian lives over others at all, but for the particular events the last 48 hours, the Christian leaders who refused to leave their church in Gaza, both really strong contenders. But actually, I'm going to give a shout out to something I think is so heartening and sweet. And that is that Mennonite Action in Harrisonburg, Virginia has been, their representatives are particularly pro-Israel, to put it really mildly. Lindsey Graham is in that area. And yeah, and so they have been doing a massive collection of phoning for, I think it's been a month now, hundreds of calls, and not just members of Mennonite Action, but mobilizing people to make these calls. And I heard a couple days ago that it has reached the point where when they have a script they follow, when any of them call the representative's office and begin the, "Hi, I'm a Mennonite living in Lancaster, Virginia," they now just sigh. The receptionists just sigh when they hear Mennonite, Lancaster, Virginia. So I think that is so awesome, and they're discouraged because, of course, this is not a political entity that's going to budge on this issue. But who knows the seeds they're planting in the people who have to answer the calls. But I am giving the shout out the winners to these people making these calls in Virginia who have been so persistent for so long that they now just get on the other end of the phone.
I love that. I love that. I like to hope that one day I will reach that point with John Nader's office.
Someday Nader's office will just sigh when you say this is no
I think I've called like 3 or 4 times in the last week and sent a handful of emails.
Beautiful.
And it's not stopping. I want to tell them that it's not stopping. It's going to keep up. So schedule the meeting.
Solidarity with you know one of our actually neighboring ridings, also conservative, and one of our Mennonite Action leaders is sort of a lone voice in this very rural area.
Mm-hmm.
And she has been so persistent with her MP that it has now gotten to the point they recognize her voice, and when she calls they just say, "Hi, Bertha."
Call your MPs. It works.
Call your MPs. It's
helpful. And if you're in Perth, Wellington, call John Nader and tell him to meet
John Nader. Tell him talk to Noam.
All right. My winner for the week is going to be the participants on the Sumud Flotilla. I think that I gave previous Flotilla cruise winners of the week as well. I think that this is one of the best things that people can be doing. Having it be such a large number of boats this time is amazing. And having people actively stand up inspires other people to stand up, like what we've seen with the dock workers. So they are my winners for the week. And with
shout
that,
out,
go ahead.
I was going to say they have asked, anywhere you are, take to the water in solidarity. It can be a pool, it can be a river, it can be a lake. I saw a scuba diver underground while they're at sea and post its hashtag from every river to every sea, and the slogan is from every river to every sea, every human must be free, because it's all about solidarity. So Noam, get in that bathtub with your, what do you call it, like the floaties, and wave your kavia.
And do it. Absolutely. If you're out there, please take to solidarity. And then after you've done that, call your local representatives and tell them that these crews must be kept safe, that they cannot be stopped, and that if Israel tries to stop them, you expect that your country will follow the Rome Statute, which compels countries to act to prevent humanitarian disasters. It is literally illegal for our leaders to not be interceding on behalf of Palestinians right now.
Correct.
So let's remember that as well. With that, we're drawing this episode to a close. Thank you so much for joining No Power Panel this week, Laura.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always lovely to talk to you, and such an important thing you're doing. Noam, keep it up. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. Have a good one.
You too.
Right.
Thank you.